Sorry to interrupt all that great conversation going on, but we need to get started. I'm Bill Squadron. I'm president of Our Energy Policy. Thanks to all of you for being here today. And we really adhere to kind of two cardinal principles. One is that our organization is almost religiously nonpartisan, and also we're very punctual. So we assure you that you will get started on time and you'll be on your way before 2 o'clock. But thanks again for taking the time to join us today. It's funny, in talking to people as I was walking around, everyone seemed to have the same theme, which is I said, well, how are things going? I said, well, good today, ask me tomorrow. And, you know, that's obviously the kind of situation we're all working through these days. And let's hopefully have an hour plus of a little bit of kind of respite from the storm, where we can have civil and serious discussion on issues that I think we all care very much about. I want to thank our co-host Con Edison for helping us put together today's program. We, as all of you do, I'm sure, understand how important transmission is, even if it doesn't get, you know, kind of the bulk of the headlines. It's really the backbone, the nerve center of our entire power ecosystem. And so if it doesn't work, nothing works. And it's, as so much of that ecosystem is today, under real pressure and challenges. And we're going to hear a lot about that from a phenomenal panel of speakers that we'll introduce in just a minute. The one thing I do want to say to some of my old friends here, but a lot of new faces, I hope you'll continue to be involved in some of the things that OEP does. I mean, our organization has been around now for 10 years or so, and our commitment is the same as the original mission, which is to bring diverse voices together to have civil, substantive, serious dialogue with the goal of both bringing people together, finding creative solutions, and advancing sound policy objectives. We've got a real diverse array of programs we do. We did one in New York a couple weeks ago on nuclear issues. We have a year-long program we're doing on the modernization and reliability of the grid with the Earthshot Foundation in partnership. We did a major program last year on critical minerals. So we really try to touch a lot of the bases across the energy landscape, and we look forward to working with all of you. I want to thank all of our partners, some of whom are here today, for your support. There may be some opportunity for others of you in the room to work with us, and we would really welcome your joining our partner program. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. I also want to acknowledge 3 of our board members here today: Todd Snitchler from EPSA, Paula Glover from the Alliance to Save Energy, and of course Michael Cohen from BP. So thank you for joining us today. The last thing I just want to mention, you may have seen some mugs out front. We have, as part of our program, which I really would encourage all of you to take advantage of on our website, the Our Energy Library, which is the most extensive resource of papers, reports, studies, all materials relating to energy, very well curated, very well tagged. So for those of you that are working on different topics, please take advantage of that program and take one of the mugs, which will remind you to use it. Finally, at the end of the conversation, we're going to open this up to questions. So as you're listening to the discussion, please reserve your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. So I'm now going to introduce our moderator. We are very privileged to have Larry Gasteiger here to moderate this discussion. He is, as I think probably most of you know, the executive director of WIRES, which is dedicated to advancing investment in high voltage transmission, and previously headed federal regulatory policy for PSEG. Before that, nearly 20 years at FERC, including chief of staff to the chairman. And Larry will introduce our panel. So thanks again to all of you for coming, and Larry, it's all yours.
All right. Great. Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the invitation to be here and moderate this great panel. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce briefly all three of our panelists, and then we'll jump right into the discussion. We do plan to allow time towards the end for questions from the audience. So while you're finishing up your lunch, I encourage you all to start thinking about questions and don't hold back. This panel is ready to take on any topic or any question you want to throw at them. They all told me they didn't think you could probably challenge them enough. So really work on coming up with some good ones. But just by way of introduction, I'll work my way down the line. To my immediate left, we have Jeb Stenhouse. Jeb is the Director of Regulatory Affairs at Invenergy. He's an economist. He has experience with the EPA, also working with DOE and FERC as part of his background. He has done a fellowship with the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In his current job, he works with Invenergy to create and execute federal policy regarding generation, transmission, and storage solutions. Next to Jeb, we've got Gretchen Kershaw. In her current role, she's the COO and VP of Strategy at Grid Strategies. She has worked for a dozen years at FERC in the past and nearly 2 years at DOE prior to leaving and going back to FERC and then coming over to Grid Strategies. Next to Gretchen, we have Stu Nachmias. In his current role, he's the president and CEO of Con Ed Transmission. He leads their wholesale transmission business, which is focused on bringing clean energy from where it's produced to where it's needed. Stu has been at Con Ed since something or other, and spent most of his career with the company. I do that because I do that with my introduction.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for doing
don't
that.
feel bad, yeah. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump into the discussion. We've got a variety of different perspectives and backgrounds here, so be interesting to hear what their thoughts are. So the topic is transmission capacity and reliability. And to get us started, I thought we would focus on the reliability side of that, and with a very general question, which I may not have to ask any more questions after this one because we're going to spend the whole time talking about that. But I'm going to start with, what are the biggest current threats to the reliability of the transmission grid? And Stu, let me start with you and then work our way back down.
So thanks for inviting me, and I'm glad to be part of the panel. And I'll just say it's glad to be doing this panel in Washington, D.C., because transmission is certainly a national issue, and we really need to address that. So let's just start. One of the things I learned early on in my career is that the electric transmission grid, the miracle, the modern invention of the grid, it's the second most complex system out there. The first most complex is the banking system. So it is super complex, and we have been working and evolving the grid and maintaining reliability. And at first it was demand-side resources, and how are we going to integrate demand response and energy efficiency and bring that into the grid. And that is challenging enough. And then we said we have renewables, and we're going to bring renewables, which are variable energy, and we're going to need to balance that. Now we have, on top of that, we have electrification, so heating and transportation electrification, and we have data centers. So we have the demand side changing, we have the supply mix changing, we have aging resources, so the generation mix is turning over. We're introducing new types of resources, and in all of the above strategy, whether it's more natural gas turbines, or it's renewables, or it's nuclear, or it's geothermal, or it's hydrogen, or it's demand, customer-sided resources, it's all of the above. And think about the complexity of managing a grid and managing reliability with everything changing really in the same time. And I think those are the threats to reliability. There are also the challenges. We also have a lot of technology that's advancing. We have artificial intelligence, which we don't know what it can do for us yet. We sort of talk about it a lot, and I think internally we talk about it and we're not sure what it means. But all of these things are going to help us. But the real threat is the demand changes, highest we've seen probably since air conditioning happened in the 60s and 70s. And then we have all the change in the resource mix. So I think that's what's happening. That sort of sets the table, Larry.
Gretchen, let me turn to you. What did Stu leave out? What do
Well,
you want
he
to supplement? to
yeah,
what he
yeah.
said?
First, thanks for having me as well. And I, as you'll find, love transmission, so always excited to have the opportunity to talk about it, why it's so important. So 3 things that I was going to sort of highlight as thinking about reliability. Stu talked a little bit about the aging infrastructure, right? Most of our transmission system and distribution system was built in the 1960s, 1970s. I think something like 25% of our transmission lines are approaching the end of their useful life. So we have this system that is just not built for the demands that Stu was talking about of today. So aging infrastructure is a huge threat to reliability as a result, and there's a lot of investment and a lot of work going into sort of upgrading and thinking about modern ways to build new infrastructure. The second is extreme weather, right? It is increasing year after year. What was previously not extreme, or previously extreme, is now turning into the normal. And so that is certainly impacting not only the sort of poles and wires, right? The tornadoes, hurricanes, Winter Storm Uri, Winter Storm Elliott, right? Obviously the physical infrastructure there, but also the generation side, right? Extreme heat, extreme cold can impact generation supply. And so these extreme events are challenging our grid and our entire system in a lot of new, different ways that we need to adjust to if we want to ensure reliability. And then sort of that flows into the third, which is accurate forecasting. And this is forecasting of weather, right? If all of our historical data is not particularly predictive of the future, that makes it even more challenging to predict those weather systems, but also, as Stu was talking about, the large load patterns, right? There's a lot of uncertainty about this new load, not only that it's large, but it's a different type of load. Where will it materialize? Will it materialize? Will it stay where it is today? And so that's another sort of challenge to the forecasting that feeds into planning and to reliability.
Jeb?
So I have the challenge of coming up with something useful to say after those wise remarks from Stu and Gretchen, but I'm Jeb Stenhouse. I'm really thrilled to be here, and you know, Invenergy is an all of the above energy and transmission development company, and we actually got into transmission development because there simply wasn't enough of it to bring all of the energy sources to bear on the market that we need. And so I want to kind of hook onto one of Gretchen's observations that with this increasingly frequent and extreme weather that we've all been living in the last few years, and that scientists expect to become more and more challenging as we move forward. I think another threat to reliability in our picture is kind of what I think of as a balkanized way of handling grids in the electricity industry as a whole in the country, which is really just kind of an historical accident of the way we had, you know, much of the story beginning in New York City with the way the grid was developed, intensely localized at first, and now we have opportunities to think about where there could be more reliable and more economic solutions at bigger and bigger scale. And that also helps us build a grid that's bigger than the weather, which is really essential, because we saw during those storms that Gretchen mentioned that there were lifelines that mitigated the disaster in many cases during those load shed events. And when those lifelines were maxed out, we saw lives lost. And so, you know, I think that's a critical challenge in front of us now, is how do we leverage the institutions we have, the richness of expertise already present in regulatory and industry organizations, and start working together in bigger scale to get a macro grid for our energy sector.
Great. Well, you all covered a lot of territory on what are perceived threats to the grid. I want to drill down on some of those, but before we do that, I'd like to focus on one I don't think I heard you guys mention, which are cyber attacks and cybersecurity. Interestingly, I was over in Spain about 3 weeks ago, and there was a little bit of a hiccup with the grid while I was over there. Had a blackout for anywhere from about 8 to 24 hours nationwide. What I thought was interesting was when the news reports are coming in as to what had happened, they were very focused on cybersecurity and cyber attacks, and that seemed to be the first thing they ruled out. So that was what they were zeroing in on. So let me turn to you guys. How resilient is our system to cyber attacks and cybersecurity threats? Gretchen, let me start with you.
I was going to say, this is not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass it over.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, all the utilities and our control centers, I think we're very aware of cyber risk. And I know I can only speak for Con Edison, right? We call the crown jewels of the system, right, is not connected outside. So we are very deliberate, very specific about making sure that we are aware of cyber risks and that we protect the systems that operate the grid. That said, and all utilities across the country and probably around the world are doing this, right? It's not something that we're unaware of. That said, the risks are ever changing, ever advancing, and it's really a challenge to always stay ahead. So we talk about AI, and we talk about all of these new technologies and how now with virtual reality and people can sort of impose as other people, really understanding what new risks are and staying ahead is important. And I think that comes down to the industry really working closely with government, working closely with each other, sharing information, and really working. It's really a tireless, never-ending effort to stay ahead. And I think it's really important that we have to do that. And I think your example of being in Spain and Portugal when that happened, that comes as the first thing that people think of, because it is an ever-present, ever-changing risk, and it is out there as a risk. And I think it's something that could happen. So really, really important to just keep working on it, and for everyone to hire the right people. We need the young, smart people who know how this stuff works to look at the utility industry and say, this is exciting, and this is where I want to work, and bring their expertise. So we need the right people, the right resources, and the right sharing.
Jeb, you have any thoughts on?
I would add to Stu's point about industry partnering with government to keep abreast of these threats, that we just saw a great example of that with FERC convening a technical conference in partnership with NERC to address some supply chain and cyber-related security standards. It just sort of goes to show the benefit of communally developing toward a more resilient grid against these threats. So appreciative of their engagement.
Great. All right, Gretchen, we gave you a pass on that one, but not the next one. I'm going to focus on extreme weather events, which I think both you and Stu had talked about at least, and get a little bit more of your perspective on that. And I guess particularly I'm interested in, you've had the experience at FERC and DOE dealing with these issues from a national perspective, but a lot of these are regional and they vary significantly, whether it's wildfires or hurricanes or unexpected extreme cold weather, things of that nature. How do we focus on it from a national perspective, dealing with some of the extreme weather events that we're seeing? And you mentioned they're increasingly more frequent and of greater ferocity as well. So how do we fix that?
Yeah, well, how do we fix that? That's a great question. No, I mean, I was going to say sort of the same, just to start, is like sort of stepping back, that there are many different extreme events, many different extreme weather events, and there's different systems and makeups across the regions. And so I think it's important when we talk about a resilient system to remember that there is no one size fits all. Every transmission line doesn't need to be undergrounded, nor can it be in certain regions. Not every substation needs to be lifted, right? There's like many different things that happen depending on where you are. But I think that for me, and Jeb already used my favorite, make the grid bigger than the weather. Like, I think it's so incredibly important to have interregional transmission that just serves as this incredible way to share resources. And it's not just sharing generation, it's leveraging load diversity. And I think that's sometimes lost in the conversation, that across the country, we do not have peaks at the same time. Demand doesn't peak at the same time. And so greater connectivity through more interregional transmission allows you to say, okay, a resource is sitting idle over here because the demand is not peaking here, but it is over here in this other region, whether it's because of extreme weather or just our everyday events. And you can shift that. We talked about Winter Storm Uri, Winter Storm Elliott. The regions that had greater import capabilities are the ones that avoided the prolonged outages. And so that's, when I look at it from the national scale, that's what I see, is we need more interregional transmission to leverage that diversity that we get. It's also, PS, saves consumers money, right? Like, not only are we making the grid more resilient, we are avoiding significant outages, we're also doing a more affordable system plan where we're not building a bunch of localized generation everywhere across the country, right? If we build generation everywhere, that's the most expensive way to do this versus leveraging that diversity across the country.
Stu, I know Con Ed has had to deal with extreme weather issues in the past from a utility perspective.
Yeah.
What
So first I'll just add, because I think Gretchen got it right, and I'll just add that different resources can exist in different parts of the country or region or even within. So we're not putting a nuclear plant in New York City. Neither are we putting lots of wind turbines, right? So we have to put that where it could go and bring the power to where it's needed. So when you describe what Con Edison Transmission is doing, we're bringing that power. And then what we need is very diverse resources. So, diversification is key, right? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. We have to have a variety of different resources, and transmission is going to bring that together. When it comes to the local utility, I think it comes down to how we plan to be more resilient and ride through issues. And what we've done at Con Edison is done segmentation with switching, so that if there is an event and something happens, we want to reduce the number of customers that are impacted and be able to keep as many customers in service as is possible. And we also need to recognize, as Gretchen said, right, there are underground, we're not going to be able to underground everywhere. I mean, New York City has a lot of underground, but underground has different risks. Underground, first of all, for Superstorm Sandy, we learned is subject to flooding, and equipment gets flooded. So you need to make sure that the equipment is resilient to water. And so that's an issue. And then when you have an outage, if you underground everything and you have an outage, let's say due to heat and overloading, it's harder to pinpoint where your fault is and know where to do. So it takes longer to repair an underground line that's out than it would an overhead line. So there's pros and cons, and so there isn't a magic bullet, but I think it's a matter of building a system that has more options and optionality to bring power from other places and to serve customers with power using different paths.
Jeb, Invenergy's perspective on extreme weather events?
One of the ways, Larry, that you framed the question that I thought was really interesting was how to think about a national perspective on transmission need against severe weather scale. And I think we benefit from having a new study that NERC, the Reliability Authority, issued late last year called the Interregional Transfer Capability Study, or ITCS. And I've been spending a lot of quality time with this study and love talking about it, because I think institutionally it gave us a national perspective of how neighbors relate to each other in their existing transfer capabilities. And then it looked at 12 weather years. And then forward projected onto the known generator and load picture that NERC had at the time to see how those weather stressors would interact with that future picture. And they had a methodology by which they found in each of those weather years there were regions that were energy inadequate and faced limitations on their ability to import energy from their neighbors. So based on all those findings, NERC was able to identify what they termed prudent additions in interregional transfer capability. And that sparked a lively and well-needed conversation about what we all think the amount should be in different parts of the grid that would benefit regions, neighbors, and how to address neighbors of neighbors to get to that bigger than the weather scale. But importantly, it sort of showed a way to have that national level conversation and to think supra-regionally about what the transfer capabilities are that we need to be resilient against these extreme weather events going forward.
Okay, well, you're not off the hook, because I'm going to pick up on your comment about focusing on interregional transfer capability and turn it back to something that was raised earlier in the discussion, which is the forecast for increasing load going forward. And what I'd like you to pick up on now is, to what extent is interregional transfer capability sufficient to address or anticipate the projected needs for in light of the increased demand that we're seeing coming down the road? How set are we?
I mean, I think that it was kind of a startling thing to see NERC identify 35 gigawatts of need on a load future that had already fallen behind the times. And this is just such a dynamic picture we're in. And the updated load forecasts are so startlingly large that, you know, the need and the stress on the system is only likely to be greater. And this is, of course, you know, NERC also stopped short, understandably, within their remit of looking at the economic value of addressing that load growth and the role of transmission in that picture. So Gretchen and her colleagues did a study of, well, what would the investment look like to achieve the prudent additions that NERC identified, and found that, you know, for every dollar spent on those transfers, we'd be getting something, I think it was $4.30 to $5.80 of benefit, which is a really remarkable cost to benefit ratio. Less than a 3-year payback. So some tremendous economic potential, and it really showing, I think, to me at least, that when we really are in one of those all of the above moments where to meet the magnitude of the load growth that is being forecast in the system and to serve AI and reindustrialization, we need to be deploying generation and transmission solutions in concert in a well-organized and broader, you know, interregional focus to upgrade the whole interconnection to be able to meet these exciting economic opportunities.
Well, Gretchen, Jeb set this up for me to toss the ball over to you
I
next.
gotta jump in. I mean,
Because let me ask you this: you know, you've had the perspective of looking at these issues from FERC, from being over at DOE, now at Grid Strategies. We know how long it takes to build transmission. Benchmark is like 10 years, more or less. Well, we've got these projections of load growth that just really kind of picked up in the last couple of years. How do you go about planning for what the anticipated needs are going to be, given what we think is going to happen with load growth, and then what might actually wind up happening?
yeah, sure. So first, I'm just going to jump in and accuse Jeb of looking at my notes, because spot on the significant cost savings from the interregional transfer capability, 35 gigawatts. I do want to note, just quickly adding on to him, when I was at DOE, we released the National Transmission Needs Study, where we found that regional transmission needed to double to meet load growth anticipated needs by 2035, interregional transmission needed to quadruple. And then in 2024, we released the National Transmission Planning Study with the national labs, lots of capacity expansion modeling, up to that regional need to 2 to 3 times, and again, interregional quadrupling. So just want to emphasize that, no, we do not have enough interregional transmission today. How do we plan for it? I think that, you know, I was also at FERC working on Order 1920, so I'm definitely going to tout all the reasons that's just spot on. But I do think that there's a lot of things that regional transmission planning does today that Order 1920 seeks to fix, still to be seen if that plays out when compliance goes through. But I think that some of the most important things for the load growth is really moving from a planning based on a static view of the system to planning based on scenarios, right? We have to have multiple visions of the future and how it might play out. We need to take stock of the facts on the ground, right? Get all of those factors and all the inputs and all of the information into the modeling for these different scenarios, and including extreme weather events. But I think that was true when 1920 came out. With the increasing load forecasting around data centers, it's even more important that there be a robust set of scenarios, right? Scenario is the way that you deal with the uncertainty as you're looking out into the future, and you look across and you look for transmission that is beneficial in a wide range of scenarios, and that will account for some, of course, error in ultimate forecasting, how it plays out.
Stu, I think you started us down this road with your opening comments. How real are these estimates? How do we plan for them? What do we do from sort of the utility perspective about those projected needs?
So I think we have to put in context, right? We're talking about capacity and energy. And capacity, right, we're building for the peak. And what is that peak demand going to be? And this is where I think interregional comes in, right? Because not everyone, and Gretchen said this, not everyone peaks at the same time. Not only that, different regions, so the weather's a little bit different, weather moves from west to east, so, and different types of customers, and different customers might have the ability. So maybe data centers will have the ability to reduce their demand and make generation supply available to be shipped somewhere else during peak hours, during peak days, right? Which isn't all of the time. It's not a lot of hours. So we need to really think broadly about that and how, and that's why interregional I think is going to be so important and hasn't been a focus in the past, and we don't have enough interregional transmission. So we need to build that out. I also think what's becoming more important and hasn't been really factored in is our lives are more and more dependent on energy, and it's only going to get more dependent, right? You said you were in Spain and nobody could get information, right? An outage 10 years ago, that wasn't as critical. We all weren't as tied to our phones, and people don't realize that they're tied to data centers and power and their Wi-Fi. Everything is the electric system. And the economic impact is huge, right? From that one-day outage, I didn't see final numbers, but it was, I think I saw a rough estimate that was certainly in the billions, right? So how do we take that into account, and then make sure that we're investing in the system and getting where we need to, and then of course balancing that with everyone's talking about affordability these days, and affordability is super important, and we need to address affordability for the customers who need help affording their bill. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest in the system, because the consequences of not having a reliable system are going to be devastating.
Yeah, just picking up on that comment about communication, I was saying earlier to the group that when I was over there, my phone still had juice, and I'm literally texting people over here to find out what's going on where I'm at in Spain, because I couldn't get information about what was happening. So. But enough about me. Let me turn it back to you, Gretchen, because I think you had talked about this topic, which was aging infrastructure, and you mentioned that a lot of our transmission infrastructure was really built back in the 1950s and 1960s. If it was a person, they'd be applying for Medicare about right now, right? So we're all looking at what does that mean for investment in the grid, and how does it affect other needs associated with the grid. And this is a topic that my members are incredibly focused on right now. It involves the idea of local transmission needs, and there's an ongoing debate around that right now. So to what extent does the aging infrastructure contribute to some of the reliability concerns and the needs for transmission investment in the grid?
A lot. Yeah, so I mean, I think there's sort of the obvious, right? Wear and tear, something that's been around and exposed to weather and exposed to all these system changes since the 1950s and 1960s. It's more vulnerable to extreme weather, to extreme load changes. It's just basic vulnerability of the age of the system. Also, this aging infrastructure requires more maintenance. And maintenance comes with outages, and sometimes those outages are very inconvenient for unexpected system changes, right? That can lead to cascading outages that you didn't expect because you needed to maintain an aging system. Then talking sort of about the modernizing of our economy and our electric system and all the needs being imposed upon the electric grid, the aging infrastructure is not sort of up to the task, right? It's not flexible, it's not responsive. We have bidirectional distributed energy coming on and off. We have large loads that can drop in an instant off the grid. We have a need for real-time monitoring. We have extreme weather. We have all of this, and that the current sort of aging piece is not ready for that. As Larry sort of mentioned, we are seeing a all-time high investment in transmission, right? I think it's like $25 billion was spent in transmission last year. Most of that is at the local level, so within a utility service territory. Most of that is spent on whatever you want to call it, depending on the region, asset management, right? Keeping the assets going. And that is important investment, right? We see wildfires, right? The result of not maintaining the system is devastating. But the one point that I want to make there is, just because I like to throw a controversial thing out there that I don't even have a strong opinion on at the moment, we can't plan the system based on fear of liability, right? We can't go to like, there could never be anything that ever went wrong. that costs consumers too much, right? You have to plan it in a way that interregional transmission, this is where it sort of it plays in, like Stu was talking about. Instead of making every pole and wire in one area perfect, you just connect to the other region so that that pole and wire can go down and get maintained and upgraded and fixed, but the power keeps flowing from other areas. So it's just, I think that just what's really important is taking a more holistic look at things. And so if we focus all on these local issues, we just lose we're sort of the forest for the trees metaphor at that point. I think that's the key with addressing aging infrastructure while also building out the interregional system we need.
Stu, how should we be looking at this aging infrastructure issue and local transmission needs and investment in local transmission?
So first, aging infrastructure. Infrastructure has been maintained. We've been spending a lot of money on O&M, but there does come a point where we need to think about how we invest in the system. And so, as an example, right, through a partnership we have called New York Transco, we recently took a 115 kV line that was in upstate New York, and the towers were older. They weren't as strong or resilient for ice loadings, and they're in a very valuable right-of-way. And so we put a new line, we put new towers, we put steel monopole towers that are much stronger. We rebuilt the 115 kV line, but then we put arms on the other side and put a 345 kV line next to it. Now, it wasn't super easy. We had to widen the right-of-way during some paths, but we were able to do that because with the new steel monopoles, we were able to reduce, it was about a 56-mile line, and we took about 200 towers away because the steel monopoles are stronger, a little bit bigger. We could do longer spans. The farms and the residents that we went through, they liked it because there were fewer poles, and the poles had a tighter footprint. And so we were able to get community buy-in, and now we have a 345 kV high voltage line that's bringing much more power from upstate to downstate New York. We still have the 115, which we needed to serve customers along the route. And I think that's a good example of how aging infrastructure and the assets, the right-of-way, the pathways can be utilized in new ways to serve more need and growing need. And I think that's the type of thing we ought to keep looking at because new greenfield is possible, but boy, is it tough. And so if we can stay in existing right-of-ways and repurpose, I think that's the value. And then reconnect perhaps to other rights-of-way that connect to other regions will also be important.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jeb, Invenergy's business model is different than the typical incumbent TO model. How do you think we should be looking at these aging infrastructure needs and local transmission investment versus other investment?
A couple of perspectives. One is that just generally across the board, there's strong and good evidence that any opportunity you can turn transmission development into a competitive procurement can unlock really important, upwards of 20 to 30% of cost savings for developing that transmission line. And so that's obviously, the circumstances will depend on whether a competitive procurement is possible there, but wherever possible, I think that's an important thing to consider for limiting, making our transmission dollars stretch as far as they can with upgrading the grid and minimizing impacts to ratepayers. The other thing, I really appreciated the way that Gretchen and Stu linked local transmission improvement to interregional connectivity, and I think that's really key. Because even when we're building an interregional HVDC line, for example, that line is going to need to interface through converter stations to local AC networks, and there's opportunities there to improve those grids and take advantage of the services HVDC transmission can provide in voltage support and power flow control. So these things really are best, I think, thought of holistically, and we're hopeful that transmission planning, which has been conducted in these Order 1000 regions, the 12 regional structure the country has right now for that exercise. If we can get to, a better, more holistic paradigm where interregional transmission can be considered in the same scenario development and planning process, I think you'll get a better tiered structure of where do local, regional, and interregional products mesh, best complement each other and get the most value you can out of transmission investment. At the moment, I think we're struggling with making sure, because the vast majority of interregional transmission in the country being developed right now is from merchant companies, and that's in part because we can mobilize private capital through voluntary offtake contracts. And we can sidestep those cost allocation debates about, when it's a ratepayer-funded line, you have to figure out which ratepayers are going to pay for which parts of that project. And with subscriber-funded transmission, we can jump over that obstacle. But we still find that integrating those projects into regional transmission planning processes has proven very challenging. And you risk, if you have blinders on about those projects existing, you risk duplicative and redundant transmission build, which is bad news for ratepayers. So those are some perspectives on how to put this whole picture together.
I just want to jump in. I mean, the hardest thing about interregional or any transmission project is cost allocation and getting people to agree to pay. It's important, though, that we recover the costs and the payment is over the life of the asset, which is 50 years or more. I mean, we see it now, right? So, because that reduces the amount each year the customers have to pay, and it aligns getting customers to pay who will get value many years later. So the merchant model is tough because who's going to pay for 50 years, right? Who knows they're going to be in business, right? If it's a business and retail customers aren't ponying up to sign up for a 50-year contract. So it's really important that cost allocation and getting agreement is tough because it's easier to not pay or to argue why you shouldn't have to pay or pay less, right? Yet it has to add to 100%. So I think cost allocation is tough, loan depreciation is tough, and I agree. The project that I mentioned, we won in a competitive solicitation. The problem with the competitive solicitations is it adds more time. So Larry, you said 10 years it takes to build a project. These processes take 3 years at least to get through. So we really need to think about how quickly we need transmission, which projects are prioritized, how to move forward, and how to get cost allocation done. Because otherwise we're just talking and we're not building.
All right, well, now I'm going to jump way ahead because since you want to look under that rock.
Yeah, I do.
Let's talk about.
I do. I want to build.
But I'm going to skip over you for a minute. I'll turn to Gretchen first. Okay. So Stu's teed this up, cost allocation. Our current cost allocation models, are they fair to ratepayers across the regions benefiting from transmission? Or what should we be thinking about or doing? Everyone says it's hard. It is hard. What should we do?
Yes, so I mean, I'll start with the caveat that I have no questions about prior cost allocations. They were all great. Moving forward, the cost allocation framework is currently broken in many ways. One is the abject failure to consider the full suite of benefits of transmission. So FERC aimed to fix that in Order 1920 by requiring the consideration of a specific list of benefits. I think that is very valuable. The problem is there's no requirement to use those for cost allocation. And then the sort of big open question right now that I lose sleep over is, will the regions all calculate the benefits in totally different ways? And we'll still be in a world where they have the same name at the top, but there's this whole different methodology. And so I think that speaking the same language on benefits and considering the full suite of benefits is like critical. But I want to the other point I'm going to make is because I want to I'm a lawyer, so I got my legal pad, I got to do lawyer stuff. There's all this debate about quantifying benefits and getting down scientifically to like this benefit number and it flows to this customer and therefore this is just and reasonable and appropriate. That's not the standard. The court requires that costs be allocated roughly commensurate with estimated benefits. And in fact, the court precedent in the Seventh Circuit says FERC has to calculate down to not even the millionth of a dollar, 10 millionth, or 100 millionth of a dollar, right? We're talking about rough. That is what is appropriate cost allocation. That's consistent with cost causation. That's consistent with beneficiary pays. So I think that's my real thing that I think we need to do is we need to get out of the weeds of calculating every single thing. And I think with resilience, that's the biggest thing, right? We're talking about building lines that you can't say Winter Storm Uri is going to happen, so we're going to flow this benefit directly to you, but you know that it might, right? It's an insurance policy. And so that broad cost allocation allows everyone that benefits from this more resilient system to also contribute to the cost of it. And I think that's sort of the critical piece. And honestly, on interregional, I think that Congress would be awesome also, because it's basically impossible. But absent Congress saying you must do something with interregional cost allocation specifically, I think that you just have to really get out of the weeds of the specific calculations.
Jeb, what's the answer for fixing cost allocation? And first of all, is it fair as it is now? What should we be doing differently on it?
I feel like it is an impossible idea that I could possibly best Gretchen's perspective and informed and practiced, from her professional practice on that question. Again, I think that what we're hopeful for is that the degree to which the interregional merchant projects can fill the gap, that we've all been struggling with the challenge of cost allocation on broad projects and the triple hurdle problem of needing to agree on selecting the project and the cost allocation for it in each of the regions that are connected, and then communally agree across that constellation of institutions. Unless and until there is a paradigm, an institutional arrangement, and some kind of policy determination to guide that cost allocation, it's critically important to deploy and take advantage of the merchant-funded projects that are on tap, and if for nothing else, as a stopgap to allow for these other cost allocation issues to be resolved. So I wish I had the answer, Larry, but I think the urgency is clear. And hopefully with these transfer needs identified and with the reliability threats clearly defined, the actors would be motivated to grapple with these issues and create a more conducive framework to advancing projects in them.
Stu, you started us down the cost allocation rat hole, so I'll give you the final word on what the answer is as to what the fix should be for it.
I think what Gretchen said, I think you need a roughly commensurate someone with FERC. We need to come out and say, this is the cost allocation for regional, interregional, and then if people want to get in and have settlement discussions and negotiate, and then that's it. We can't be fighting about it. It needs to get done, and we need to build. And some people are going to have to pay a piece that they may think, if they did the analysis to the 100th decimal, that they should pay less, but they're going to have to pay, and then maybe they'll get a project that they'll get a little bit more benefit than they expected. The one thing I was going to say is, I don't know, and I challenge anyone here in this room, if you know of a transmission line that is not well utilized. I think every single transmission line ever built is well utilized, so that doesn't happen. And when we build out the AC system, I think the challenge is, for any upgrades, electricity flows the path of least resistance. It changes the flows on other parallel lines in the grid. And so everyone is always better off figuring out some sort of study that shows that they shouldn't pay, right? And you can, and let me tell you, you can find any consultant and pay and get a study done that shows I shouldn't pay. But someone's going to have to, we need to stop that, because otherwise we're never going to build transmission.
Jeb, I couldn't tell if you were signaling by touching your nose that you wanted to respond to Stu or not. So I'll give you the opportunity.
You read my body language perfectly. No, because not at all to gainsay what Stu was saying with regard to cost allocation, but the idea that there is still opportunity to better utilize existing transmission infrastructure. One thing I think we've observed, and several market monitors have been reporting on for several years, is interties between the markets and across the market seams we're missing an opportunity to save billions of dollars by having those flows be economic. So we have like upwards of a quarter of the time those trades are going in the wrong direction. So you're taking higher cost electricity and displacing lower cost electricity at the destination. And it's just an accident of not operating those interties in an optimal fashion. So they're often scheduled in advance when you have to make a guess at what you think the power prices will be when that trade window comes up. And those guesses are almost always wrong. And then you get these counterproductive flows that are lost money for everybody involved. And So intertie optimization is an opportunity that is low-hanging fruit, we think, and would greatly improve, the value you can get from the interregional transfer capability we already have, and of course would maximize the value of the new transfer capability we need to deploy. And I'm not an engineer and I'm not a software expert, but I think it just means making computers in each market talk to each other more intelligently so that you can get real-time pricing information to feed into those interregional trades. It's a lift for the RTOs involved, but I think it's a big payoff that would be a really wonderful advance on making Stu's vision come true.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask one more of my questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for your questions. So start thinking while they wrap it up on this one. And this is with a nod to my friend Todd Schnitzler, which is that you can't really think a whole lot about transmission without also thinking about generation development, and what the needs are going to be associated with that. We've had these ongoing debates between fossil fuel generation, clean energy resources. It's driving people towards safe territory of an all of the above strategy on generation. So if you look at it from that perspective of an all of the above generation strategy, how does that fit in with anticipated transmission needs? Stu, do you want to start?
So I don't always talk about Texas, but the renewable energy zones were a great idea. And it worked. And they built the transmission to help connect renewables in Western Texas. I think we have to think about because a lot of the resources we're talking about now are location constrained. They're not going to go anywhere. So we need to think about building transmission to different areas where different types of resources will be available. And I think that not only will help encourage the generation to build, it'll also address, we didn't talk about Order 2023, but all the interconnection issues. Because one of the issues, and we have with the queue and the lineup of generation interconnecting, is there's not a lot of headroom where it's needed. So if we built out the grid, now I'm not saying build like, copper sheet, right? But if we had a plan and said, these are the types of resources that should be in different parts of the country, and this is how we have to interconnect it, that it would be really, I think, helpful for then building the transmission, helping the interconnection queue, getting the resources built that we need for the future, serving load in a more reliable and resilient fashion.
Gretchen?
Yeah, I think many thoughts here. I think that, first of all, we've talked about this a bit already, but all generators have outages. It doesn't matter what generation you're building, you need transmission. And interregional transmission in particular, just to beat a dead horse, is so important to get that diversity in terms of generation supply as well as load. And so I think that divorcing sort of transmission from the very hot topic of what generation source is preferred would be great for transmission so that we can get it built, because it, as Larry said, it takes 10 years to build large-scale transmission, so we don't have time to deal with all the debates about what generation's at the end of it. We need to advance interregional transmission development today. And I think, you mentioned 2023, I was going to mention generator interconnection queues as well, right? We need to, again, it takes a long time to build the transmission. The most expensive, least efficient, worst possible way to build transmission is through individual network upgrades in the interconnection queue process, right? We have to be forward-looking, we have to be proactive. That's what 1920 is doing, and sort of 1920 with 2023 takes a number of steps to try to improve that generator interconnection transmission planning process, and I think that's, whether it's all the above or you want to pick your generator, that needs to happen.
Jeb?
Yeah, I would add to those excellent remarks that all of the above, in my mind, includes recognizing that wind in one location and wind in another location are very different types of generation in terms of their hourly profiles and when they can bail you out of a jam. And that's that generator resource diversity we're talking about with broadening your net, being able to pull on generators in a farther away from where you are. And then the simple fact of how the sun works is that, solar far to your west is still producing when you're in that evening crunch and your sun has faded. So I think that's the beauty of interregional transmission is it's diversifying both generator types, bringing serving all generators on the grid, but it's also diversifying even within what you might think of as a single class of resource, and that is really critical for managing hour by hour net load and keeping reliability as strong as it can be.
Great. Well, I haven't even gotten through half the questions I had set up for this, so I've got plenty more, but we're going to shift to give you all an opportunity to challenge this panel with some good questions on transmission. So we'll start over here.
Yeah, excuse me. Oh, yeah, great panel. Enjoyed it a lot. Howard Marks, K Street Alternative Energy Strategy. So my condo looks a little bit like an electrical substation. I mean, I'm wearing right now an electric watch, hearing aids, cell phone, whatever. But EVs. I also own an EV. There's 284 million vehicles in the United States, 10% in California. And I raised California because Governor Newsom wants to convert all the vehicles in California, all 30 million, in 10 years, 10 years, only 10 years to electricity. How's this going to happen? I mean, where we're having difficulty now, we heard that this afternoon. You guys did a great job in telling us what the issues on transmission are. But, where's the industry in all this? Why isn't the industry pointing out that this is sort of like illusionary? This is like a pie in the sky, and it could be very dangerous if we move in that direction, where we don't really have the production and we don't have the transmission and the grid to support just the 30 million vehicles in California that Governor Newsom wants to convert to EVs. Thank you.
All right, who wants to take that one on first?
I mean, I'll jump in just to say that this is why I work on transmission, because it is has been for a long time the often forgotten piece to the puzzle. The same with sort of the push for renewable energy, right? That's why we got these clogged interconnection queues and no transmission capacity, right? Transmission has taken so long to build, so long to plan. There's all these problems. So now here we are facing all these good ideas and policies being pushed forward, but they're all hitting the same problem, and it's the transmission capacity. And so, I mean, my hope is that all of these significant drivers, EVs, electrification of buildings, large load data centers, AI, all of that is going to finally push us to get faster and better at building the transmission that we need. But there's probably, there's hard conversations to be had as a result of the timing mismatch between some of the policies and the transmission.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think it's going to take some time for all this to unfold and for that level of penetration of EVs and even building electrification to happen. And some of it is, there was a big jump start, but it's slowing down a little bit. I think we need to have a vision of what this could look like, so it gives us time to plan and prepare for it. But it's not, those millions and millions of vehicles aren't happening tomorrow, thankfully. So hopefully we'll be able to plan and use different technologies to balance loads and do some interesting things. But one of the things we're doing at Con Edison, one of the proposals is a new substation in the Bronx, because we know there are a lot of fleets that are looking to electrify their vehicles. That's great for New York City, right? Because it's great for clean air, but we have to build out the infrastructure because these trucks are going to charge overnight. They travel short distances. So it's a very good place to have that, but we're planning for it, and I think it's going to take a lot of time and effort and money, and in the end, hopefully, we will all be better for it. But we'll have to see.
Thank you.
I would just say props for driving an EV. I thank you for driving an electric vehicle. I think that changes something many of us are living now, and I can't really add much more to the great perspectives we've already heard.
Over to this side.
Larry, I know on your list somewhere is a stakeholder engagement NIMBY question, so heads up for the panel. Near and dear to my heart, right, in terms of campaigns that we do on energy infrastructure is just the value of stakeholder engagement early on in the process. And all of you have a bunch of different perspectives, but I'm teeing up this question in my head as you all are talking, and literally I get an inbound from a reporter asking me, do I think this specific filing has legs? And it's the Institute for Legislative Analysis, Center to Protect Ranchers, and the Christian Employers Alliance, which joined together to file rescission requests on Order 1920. This happened last week for ESG, DEI, and Excel wildfire issues. So hitting the panoply of, strange bedfellows there, and we're seeing much more of this, right? You're seeing kind of ultra-conservative groups kind of fund and fuel opposition. You're seeing utility on utility, kind of warfare on transmission lines. So would love to hear a little bit of your perspectives. And I know, Invenergy specifically has kind of rolled out lots of campaigns talking about their stakeholder engagement. So, if you could share some of your, what's worked, what hasn't worked.
Yeah, stakeholder processes are getting increasingly complicated and more dangerous. Just look at the board of directors vote at PJM, right? So what are your thoughts on how to deal with the challenges around stakeholder processes and transmission?
She called you out.
Yes, well,
No, I'll give you a minute to think of
I wish I could somehow claim credit for Invenergy's success in stakeholder engagement, but I'm both too new to the company and have not, being in DC, I don't get to see as much of that action as I would actually like, because our teams do tell us that that's absolutely vital for developing and deploying this kind of infrastructure. And when you're talking, we have 1,800 linear miles of transmission rights-of-way that we're developing on multiple HVDC projects, and that just having those at the community level, having understanding and buy-in and support for why this is valuable infrastructure that will save everybody money is a key part of the process. And that may be as much as I can observe in this equation, because there's a lot of noise, and a lot of hay that people try to make for their own personal agendas. But I think you just have to go back to the project particulars and the merits and keep people focused on why this infrastructure is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very glad you asked the question. I definitely want to talk about it. So when I was at DOE in the Grid Deployment Office, I had the distinct pleasure of reinitiating the National Interest Electric Transmission Corridor Program, which is tied to the Limited Federal Backstop Siting Authority that FERC has. Although I was there sort of right from the genesis of what's our new process look like, let's put a new process in place, now let's run this process. We got to the third phase right before the transition in the administration, and then I left. But I did get the distinct pleasure to interact with a lot of stakeholders who have a lot of very legitimate big feelings about transmission. And I think that there's a couple of key points to me. One is I think that there is a very real and important place for federal transmission siting for big interregional, multi-state, truly national interest lines, right? I think that. But putting that to the side, I think that state level is the right place to site transmission. I think they are the experts with their communities. I think that early engagement is absolutely critical, and something that we did a lot of at the Department of Energy was community benefits plans with developers, working on grants to communities. I think it's so important to acknowledge that transmission development, all infrastructure development, has a real impact on communities, right? The people who try to pretend like everybody wants a transmission tower in their backyard, like I do, but most people are not like me. Most people don't want that. And that, I think it's really important to acknowledge that and to address it and to let people be heard, and then talk about what does that community need, right? Do they need workforce development? Do they need community centers? Can we work on a sort of mitigation plan for environmental impacts and work with the communities? I think that is absolutely critical. And I think on that, I mean, I saw that filing on 1920. I think that there is a dearth of misinformation and misunderstanding in it, and I think that is true across all things at the federal level, trickling down, right? That's a lot. There's a lot to go from a wonky transmission planning rule at FERC that most people never even heard of the agency, to people in the ground who were saying okay, why are you going to stop hardening my grid now? Or why are you going to have wildfires because FERC did this thing? And there's just this education gap that is really important to fill and really hard to fill.
Yeah, I'll just make just two very quick points, stuff that I know you know. But early and often is really important. One, to prevent false information. because rumors happen, false information happens, and it's once it gets a hold, it's really hard to stop or reverse. So you got to get early and often to give factual information and answer questions. The second point I would make is a good stakeholder process doesn't mean you're getting 100% buy-in. There are always going to be people who are not going to want the project. And all it really means is they've gotten the factual information, they can participate in a process, but ultimately a decision will have to be made to move forward, and not everybody is gonna sign on.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, Christy, go ahead.
Oh, I have a list. But I always have a list. One of the things I have a question about, and Gretchen, you mentioned it, sort of how, it's not working if we're planning out the grid by looking at the interconnection queue, but that is the information that we have, and it is the generation that we need. The cost recovery and allocation problem is real.
It's real.
I mean, it unwinds everything. And so is getting past this issue, especially if we have to wait on Congress to do something like thou shalt fund into regional capability, not a good year for that? Probably not for the next couple years for that. So is there a way we should be looking at tariff structures to have instead of having to take what's needed on the grid side, run it through affected utilities, have those ratepayers pay it, and then wait for the generators to pay back the grid? Is there a way we could take out those customers so that they don't feel like they're contributing to something that they have trouble feeling the tangibility for? I mean, we can all in this room talk about, sure, I can show you the benefits. I can show you the savings. To somebody who's watching their bill go up, they don't care. Those intangibles don't speak to them, and I think we all know that. So is there a way we can sort of link up the fact that it's the generation that we need that requires the transmission that we need? Is there a way to think about rates in a way that sort of move that out of the regulated rate base, get it out of the way of the state regulators a little bit, and see if we can sort of marry those two things that are so inextricably linked without putting the ratepayer in the middle of it all the time?
I think that's tough because you're asking a generator that isn't there yet to commit to paying for something, right? It's a timing issue, right? So could there be a reimbursement later? Maybe, but we have to figure out, how it gets built, because from a transmission development point of view, you have to pay for it really as it's being developed and then right away, and it may not be. The generators are going to connect over time. So we just have to figure out, right, what are the different options there. I think in the end, though, even if it goes, and I know people are going to hate this answer, but even if it goes on the generator side of the ledger, customers are paying either way. Are they paying in their supply charge or in their utility charge, right? And so I think, if that's really the premise, right, maybe we need to do a better job figuring out how it gets paid by customers. Is there a ramp up so that they get the actual benefit of the flow and they see the growth and we get the growth in usage, right? If we have growing demand, increased usage helps, defray the cost too. So are there ways that we can ease in on the cost impact to customers? Or make the benefits more tangible. So maybe that's a place to think more about how we sort of address over the life of the project the recovery.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add that part of the value of interregional transmission, one of the benefits in FERC's list is deferred generation, right? I mean, it's not always, transmission is not always for generation is what I'm trying to say. So like, especially when you're interregional, right? You're talking about connecting pools of generation that already exists a lot of times, and you're not talking about interconnecting new generation sources. So I think there's different buckets of the need for the transmission that maybe is part of the thinking through innovative rate structures. My second point is just that I strongly support innovation, right? I think that we're oh, this is how we do rate making, and there we are. And it's hard, right? People don't get excited about rate making. I've actually, like, some of the grid strategy staff, we're working on like state level rate cases, and I've been like trying to pump people up of like, rate making is where it's at. You got to understand rate making because like it's the basis of everything else. And I know it seems super boring, but it's actually really important. But I think that like some of that is like literally people understanding how the rates work is a barrier to innovating on how to do it. And I think that like rate innovation is, I know this isn't your question, but I'll just like throw it out there, like the large loads, right? I think rate innovation around these large loads is also really important. And so I think there's a lot of different places where I think some smart thinking and some really like digging into the way things work or could work would be really valuable for ratepayers.
We're going to take an easy question from you next time.
He'd be disappointed in the other.
I would. Jeb, do you have anything to add?
Only that when Gretchen invoked the idea of large loads and rate making kind of entering that equation, one of the things we've been deliberating at Invenergy about is to what extent does the interconnection of new large loads affect the network upgrade picture you thought you needed to do when you were just looking at the generator queue and you weren't thinking about that, or maybe you didn't know about the oncoming large load. So we think there is an efficiency in integrating these pictures and having transmission planners think about transmission, generator interconnection, and load interconnection where the load is sufficiently large enough to merit inclusion in that picture. And that there's very likely going to be ways to avoid overbuilding network upgrades to make all that interconnection work. You just have to make sure you're bringing those pieces together.
Look over here. Was there a question over here? All right, go there. Yep.
Thank you very much. Great panel. Thank you very, very much I learned a lot. So I have a question so I agree with the general thrust of what's been said. But in the last year or two, I've been working on the resilience issues from the point of view of what you do during prolonged outages, extreme weather. So glad you covered that. And work with some people who've worked for a long time on resilience on Defense Department bases around the country, against long outages, so on. And so if you look at essential loads, grocery store, gas stations, shelters, not letting food spoil, being able, 3-4 days outages are devastating. You know it better than me. So when we looked at what kind of essential loads should have continuous service, even during long outages, it adds up to a lot. 25% might be a reasonable guess, but if you have EVs and all electric heating, that part is going to grow. So you need distributed infrastructure for that. Solar and storage, if it's going to be zero emissions, is sort of the ready answer. By my reckoning, that needs an on-ramp into the high voltage system. Currently, we have one-way traffic. You get the electrons, you degrade them, you send them back. It needs and FERC Order 2022, of course, is the vehicle for that, but I don't see that we are building the infrastructure for it or that the RTOs are thinking about it in any active way, in the same way as we feel the need for all the transmission. I completely agree. I think we need to build these on-ramps in the same time frame, 15 years, 20 years, but we need to think about it now. At NREL, the distributed side is sort of in a separate silo from energy transition planning, and I couldn't get them to talk to each other when I wanted to do a study. So it's a big problem, I think. I just would love your opinion on whether it's a big problem, what we should do about it.
Yeah, the silence, I think, people looking. I think a lot of the resilience for loads like that really comes down to distribution level resilience and helping. So the most obvious example is hospitals, right? So they have their own backup generation. They're required to, in many cases by law, to have that. I think when we think about supermarkets and groceries and frankly even like Home Depots and those kinds of things. It's at the local level, and I think we could do some of this resilient storage at the transmission level. The issue is going to be, right, because at the transmission level, it's feeding so much of the distribution system. Any transmission line, it's so big. How do you then control who gets to get turned on? And it connects, from transmission to distribution to the local delivery system, right? So it's going to wind up being a lot of politically a lot of tough decisions, right, of whose meter gets to be turned on and whose meter has to stay off, which is why I think it's been really more at the customer end use side to deal with that.
My question was actually the opposite. So
Go
if you
ahead.
have a lot of distributed resources, you're going to have surpluses if you're operating as microgrids.
Yeah.
You need to feed that back into the high voltage system
Yeah,
at various times, and we're not making accommodation for that, to my knowledge.
to feed it back, and then you have to figure out where you send it,
Yeah.
right? Who gets to
That's
use it,
what-
which is
that's
the
what my
issue that I
question
was saying, right? So that'll be. There's probably a lot to learn. I don't have a good answer to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the sort of facts on the ground part of Order 1920 and the scenario planning. Like when you look at the factors, like electrification is definitely in there, and not just electrification, just distributed generation and distributed sources and what's happening at this, because all the states are also approaching it differently. I think this is where I said earlier, sort of, well, still to be seen how 1920 plays out. Like that's the type of opportunity that I see from the requirement to do the scenario planning, and right, there's a list of 7 factors that the planners have to take into account. And I think that those factors could capture what you're talking about. Will it? That's still to be seen when they actually start implementing, and that's perhaps going back to some stakeholder involvement discussions, right? Like educating stakeholders about what are the factors, especially states, and like to push into the regional plan, make sure you're thinking about this, right? And so that's my answer right now is it should be part of it. It should go into that plan. It's just to be seen whether it will actually.
So for our last question, we'll have regulator prerogative, and I had challenged the FERC table to come up with the panel, so I'm going to turn it back over to them for our last closeout question.
I didn't know that there was going to be so much pressure. So this will be like an easy one potentially. But I was just a little curious. I don't feel like at least I haven't heard a lot of focus on the aging part of the infrastructure piece of the equation. I feel like there's a lot of talk on the unprecedented load growth and the build out of the transmission and efficiencies that we're going to need to gain in order to facilitate that. But I was really interested in the conversation earlier about how there has to be kind of this joint mutual process of continuing to update the grid to fix those no longer able to be productive pieces of the grid at the same time that you're actually building out the grid. I know that in, obviously the resource planning, resource adequacy, there's a lot of pressure recently about different areas of the country being very short. I was just curious if there is also a similar pressure on the aging infrastructure side of the transmission of saying, oh, at the same time that you're needing to build out this grid and facilitate all this load, we're also going to reach this critical point where such a large portion of the grid is aging that you're also going to have kind of this, I don't want to say emergent condition, but like very serious situation where very large portions of lots of the grid is going to need to be updated in order to function properly.
So, look, utilities have always been planning, the maintenance and for replacement of key assets, and you don't do it all at once, right? Over time, just like you would in your house, right? You sort of, I change my water heater before it breaks because I don't want to have a flood, right? So utilities do that. I think where the pressure is to think about it in terms of planning ahead and saying, instead of doing the regular maintenance, should I be upgrading? And I think that's where, because I can take the funds I would have put in for a maintenance program, even a capital maintenance program, to do my normal upgrades, because it's not like something that goes in for 50 years and we don't do any work. We're always doing maintenance work. So should we instead take those dollars and consolidate it to do an upgrade? And I think that's where the effort needs to be more focused, and I'm seeing much more and more of that is on upgrading, and being able to then utilize, and instead of putting the maintenance capital, contribute that toward an upgrade. In fact, in ISO New England, that's they have a whole method of benefit cost analysis, and they put on the benefit side. If it's an aging infrastructure project, right, they'll take that value and not only put it on the cost side, but put it on the benefit side, because we're going to not spend that maintenance capital. It'll go toward the upgrade capital. So things like that, I think more of that has to be done. I'm not sure I answered your question at all. But.
That was really interesting insight. I suppose to follow up on that, given the need to build out the transmission system so fast at such a speed to meet the unprecedented growth in demand, do you see any concerns with that other side of the equation, with using those resources to facilitate the upgrades that you were explaining are necessary, like given the dual pressures from both sides?
Yeah. No, I think we need to do more of that, because now we have suddenly this large growth, and the asset we have are the rights of way that are existing that is going to allow us to move more quickly. So I think we have to keep doing more and more of that, and I think many utilities are starting to do more of that, and we need to do so. Instead of just replacing in kind, we need to consider how we change it to meet the increasing demands. Right? It was only, a year ago that we suddenly had all this data center demand, right? And we started seeing all the growth sort of skyrocket, and whether that stays or mitigates a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If you have more to add to.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to plug advanced transmission technologies.
I was hoping that would get mentioned.
There you go.
But I think that, that we had a question, we were going to talk about sort of how do you prioritize hardening versus maintenance versus expansion? And my answer is we don't prioritize. They're all happening. They need to all happen now. But it's nice because we have these tools, grid enhancing technologies. We have high performance conductors. We can put grid enhancing technologies on the existing grid and get more out of it. We can reconductor existing rights of way. We can put in high performance conductors, which just significantly increase the capacity of an existing right-of-way. As Stu said, sometimes people act like you don't need to change the existing right-of-way. You often need to adjust the right-of-way. But it's still way better than starting from pure greenfield development. And we have these advanced towering now, where you can go from everybody puts the lattice towers on their logos and everything, and it's like, no, we have monopoles now. This is great. We can reduce the footprint significantly. So I think that there's all these opportunities to use our existing rights of way, to use our existing grid. That's really great for consumers. And because large-scale transmission takes 10 years to build, we have to do it all at the same time. And so it's just an overlapping on timing, where you may be constructing something here, something else is in the planning process, something else is in the permitting process, right? It's different stages, but you sort of have to do it all now. We don't need to do it all yesterday to meet the demand projections.
So I was hoping we could keep going till we got you guys an easy question. It's pretty obvious we weren't going to get
Be here all day.
Not with this crowd.
There are no easy questions here.
There are no easy questions.
That was an incredibly thoughtful, comprehensive, insightful discussion. We got a hand for a panel. Really appreciate it. We will post the audio of this. So for any of you who have colleagues who would like to listen to this conversation, it'll be posted on our website in a couple of days. We'll also circulate a summary, but I mean, it's really underscored. I mean, the only thing I kept thinking, listening to all of you, was the title of that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is sort of what you kept saying, which is quite a challenge, but at least we have a lot of people working on it, which I think we can be grateful for. So I do want to thank once again our co-host, Con Edison. Thank you very much for your support, and all of our partners who are listed there for their support. I want to also thank our OEP staff, which is based here, Jordan Crow, Julia Safadana, and Jenna Soroka for their help in putting this together. And I definitely want to thank our fantastic panel. So Gretchen, Stu, Jeb, and Larry, thank you for that discussion. And last but not least, thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us today. We will be in touch with you about future programs, and I really encourage all of you to join us for the ones that are coming up over the next couple of months. So I wish all of you a hopefully not very wet rest of the day and a great Memorial Day weekend, and thanks again for coming.